Assalamu alaikum. This is Dr. Hasna with Hasna's Anatomy. Welcome back to my channel. Do not forget to subscribe to it. Today I'll be talking about the structure and the muscles of pharynx, and trust me, you do not want to miss it. Watch till the end and you will have all the muscles and the structure of pharynx on your fingertips. Let's get started with the video. So the structure of the pharynx begins from the inner to the outer side. We're going to go and we're going to figure out what lies. Firstly is your mucosa. Then there is this layer of submucosa, after which there is going to be the layer of the fascia called the PB fascia, the pharyngobasilar fascia. Why is it called that? Because I'm just going to show it to you. The pharyngobasilar fascia is going to extend from the base of the skull and going to form median raphe on the posterior wall of the pharynx. This pharyngobasilar fascia between the base of the skull right over here and between the superior constrictor muscle over here, it is at its thickest. All right, why is it thickest? Because there is a gap between the superior constrictor and the base of the skull. This gap is filled by this fascia's thickening, and posteriorly your pharyngobasilar fascia forms the pharyngeal raphe. Let's suppose we're viewing the pharynx posteriorly. So there are muscles of the pharynx, right? So these muscles come, and we're going to talk about the muscles shortly. These muscles are going to come and they are going to meet in the midline to form a raphe. This raphe is formed by the pharyngobasilar fascia. After the pharyngobasilar fascia, we have the outer circular coat of muscle layer. And then we have longitudinal muscle layer, after which finally we have the buccopharyngeal fascia. This is the fascia that will cover the buccinator, BP fascia. Remember one thing, between the buccopharyngeal fascia and the muscular coat, you lie all the plexuses of the veins and nerves of pharynx. Remember this important MCQ point. All right, now we are talking about the outer circular muscle coat. This muscular coat consists of the constrictor muscles. All right, and the longitudinal coat consists of the elevator muscles of the pharynx. So guys, the name says it, their actions are similar. The constrictors constrict and carry out the function of peristalsis within the pharynx, whereas the longitudinal coat elevates the pharynx. So let's talk about the circular muscle coat. It has three muscles. First is the superior constrictor, the middle constrictor, and then the inferior constrictor. All right, remember one thing, the inferior constrictor is going to overlap with the middle constrictor, which is in turn going to overlap with the superior constrictor. So basically there are double muscular coats everywhere. Everybody's overlapping with everyone except for this little part over here, which I'm going to talk about later. All right, let's talk about the first constrictor. This diagram over here is showing you the side view of the whole pharyngeal situation. This is the anterior side, this is the posterior side. You can see the tongue is lying anteriorly. This is the mandible and the teeth, the hyoid bone, thyroid cartilage, the cricoid cartilage, and posteriorly you can see all these muscles are going to join this area, midline raphe, the pharyngeal raphe. First, let's talk about the first muscle. This is the superior constrictor. The origin of the superior constrictor you can see right here. The base of the skull obviously has this projection coming out, the medial pterygoid plate. Pterygoid hamulus is the first origin of the superior constrictor, after which this is the pterygomandibular raphe, connecting this pterygoid plate to the mandible. Finally, from the mylohyoid line, which will be over here, because the mandible is basically going to be over here. And these three are the more important origins of the superior constrictor muscle. Insertion is the pharyngeal raphe, from which the other side superior constrictor comes, also inserts into it. It's basically the pharynx is wrapped with the constrictor muscles. Next muscle is the middle constrictor. You can see the middle constrictor is originating from, this is the stylohyoid ligament running from stylo to hyoid bone. This stylohyoid ligament gives origin to the middle constrictor, and the hyoid bone gives origin to the middle constrictor, which goes ahead and again inserts into the median raphe. Next is your inferior constrictor. Now, the interesting part of the inferior constrictor is that it's divided into two parts. The part which runs between the thyroid cartilage to the median raphe, originating in the thyroid cartilage to the median raphe, is known as the thyropharyngeus. Quite simple, right? And then below the thyroid cartilage is the cricoid cartilage, right? It runs from the cricoid to the median raphe. So obviously it is known as the cricopharyngeus. The entire inferior constrictor is divided into this thyropharyngeus and cricopharyngeus. So although everywhere else there was an overlap, there is this area over here at the lower part of the thyropharyngeus muscle, where the thyropharyngeus muscle is actually just single. There is no overlapping, no other muscle is coming over here. It's a single sheet of muscle. This area right here is an area of weakness. Here we'll talk about a very important point that is an exam question. This area lies at the level below the vocal folds and at the upper border of the cricoid lamina. It is known as the Killian's dehiscence. And what is the significance of this? Is that if there is any food bolus, suppose it's going down your pharynx, right? Now what happens is, the issue with the Killian's dehiscence is that it is an area of weakness. From here, your pharynx can outpouch, and if the pharynx outpouches, it is known as the pharyngeal diverticulum. Diverticulum, anything is coming outside, right? It's not in its normal position. This pharyngeal diverticulum usually occurs as a result of an neuromuscular incoordination. Is because of the difference in nerve supply of the two parts of the inferior constrictor muscle, guys. Let me repeat that again. The thyropharyngeus and the cricopharyngeus have different nerve supplies, and that is the issue. One is being supplied by the pharyngeal plexus, whereas the other is being supplied by the recurrent laryngeal nerve. Now let's suppose peristalsis is occurring. The thyropharyngeus is contracting to push the food bolus down. Here is the cricopharyngeus below the thyropharyngeus. And this has to relax in order for the food bolus to go down, and then it will contract to pass it further down, right? That's how the peristalsis works. Now, if there is any neuromuscular incoordination, and what happens is, rather than relaxing, this cricopharyngeus also contracts. This will cause the food bolus to go upwards, and at the same time the pressure will cause a diverticulum to come out, this Killian's dehiscence area, and that is the significance of this area. Next, let's talk about the longitudinal muscle cord. This consists of three muscles, which are the elevators of the pharynx. These are the stylopharyngeus, running from styloid process to the lateral walls of the pharynx. The palatopharyngeus, obviously coming from the palate to the pharynx, and the salpingopharyngeus, salpingo meaning auditory tube, running from the auditory tube to the palatopharyngeus muscle. It fuses with that, right? So these are the three muscles that are longitudinal. Now let's talk about the structures that lie between these muscles and these important landmarks. The first gap we all know is the sinus of Morgagni. This lies between the base of the skull and the superior constrictor muscle. This is covered by the pharyngobasilar fascia, and it's very important to know what structures pass through this gap. Guys, over here I'd like to give you a mnemonic. Mnemonic goes like lap GS is Rio. So first gap is between the base of the skull and superior constrictor and the middle constrictor, and then it's between the middle constrictor and the inferior constrictor, and final gap just below the inferior constrictor. So between the base of skull and superior constrictor lies lap. L for levator villi palatini muscle, the auditory tube, the ascending palatine artery, and P is for the palatine branch of the ascending pharyngeal artery. Next, we have between the superior constrictor and your middle constrictor lies your GS structures. G for the glossopharyngeal nerve, and S is for the stylopharyngeal. Just you can even see here is passing between the gap of the superior and middle constrictor. Next gap is between the middle constrictor and the inferior constrictor. These two between them, this is the gap which consists of the passage of internal laryngeal nerve and superior laryngeal vessels. Next gap comes below the inferior constrictor. And what comes after the inferior constrictor? What comes after the pharynx? The esophagus, right? So between esophagus and inferior constrictor is the Rio. Rio structures give passage to the R, which is recurrent laryngeal nerve, I, inferior laryngeal vessels, and the O is because the esophagus will begin after this. All right. So this is the structure that lie between the pharyngeal muscles. Make sure you remember that. And that was all you need to know about the pharynx anatomy. I really hope I made the concept easy for you. Do not forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching.